Good morning and welcome speakers and members of the audience to the 6th webinar in the All Energy Decarbonised Virtual Summit and the 23rd one we've run since May. Today the emphasis is on Decarbonise, which is co-located with All Energy, the UK's largest renewable and low carbon energy exhibition and conference in normal times, and which concentrates on the key pillars of low carbon heat, energy efficiency and low carbon transport. There are around 280 of you gathered in our virtual audience for Meet the Minister, an update on Energy Efficiency Scotland. It's all energy efficient Scotland. I got that wrong. It's always a joy to welcome Paul Wheelhouse, Scotland's Minister for Energy, Connectivity and the Islands. Indeed, the Thursday of the live event at Glasgow's SEC is traditionally Meet the Minister Day, when he delivers a keynote address and answers questions. I'm delighted that that is just what he's going to do this morning. Welcome, Minister. We much appreciate you taking time to be here. I'm Judith Patton, Project Director of our duo of shows and the co-creator of All Energy way back at the start of the century. It's time for just a few housekeeping points. Whilst I talk briefly, my slide will help you get the greatest benefit possible during your time with us today and afterwards. It is important that if you would like to ask questions or rate this webinar, that you shrink your screen from full screen to be able to see where to do both things. And if you opt for attachments, you can see all 8 of the webinars being held during this virtual summit. Tuesdays and yesterdays are already available on demand viewing, as this webinar will be later on today, and the presentations will take just a little bit longer, but will be online very soon. We have the pleasure of Minister Wheelhouse's presence for the first half an hour of this session. Sorry, Minister, no tour of the exhibition afterwards. Then, under the chairmanship of Ragnar Lowe, Head of Heat Planning and Delivery at the Scottish Government, and directly concerned with policy and strategy within Energy Efficient Scotland, you'll hear from those determined to move the dial to ensure ever greater levels of energy efficiency and use of low carbon heat. Without more ado, I'd like to urge all of you here today and your families to stay safe in these worrying times. And now pass over to Raggy and wish you all a highly informative 90 minutes.
Thank you so much, Judith, and welcome everybody. It's going to be a really excellent session. Thank you to the Minister as well for giving the keynote address. And without further ado, I shall simply introduce Mr. Paul Wheelhouse MSP, as Judith's already mentioned, Minister for Energy, Connectivity and the Islands, who's going to give the keynote address this morning.
Thank you very much, Raggy, and thank you indeed to Judith for her kind words. And I would echo what Judith says. I hope you all and your families and friends, loved ones are all staying safe at this very challenging time. So good morning to all 280 of you, I think I heard Judith say, and it's great to join you this morning. Delighted again to have the opportunity to speak to you at what has been a very successful series of All Energy webinars this year, 23 I think Judith said. So today's sessions will obviously be chaired by Raggy and Scottish Government officials, and we're really keen to hear your views. So I encourage you all to participate in the discussions, including on this morning's topic of Energy Efficient Scotland. And to start us off today, I'd like to reflect on the strong foundation and progress that's been made over the 2 years since we published the Energy Efficient Scotland route map, which itself builds on a long legacy of work on energy efficiency over the last decade. As we continue to battle the COVID-19 pandemic, we mustn't forget that we're still living with a climate emergency and that urgent action is clearly needed. Action over the next decade or so will be vital if we're to successfully remove poor energy efficiency as a driver of fuel poverty and eradicate greenhouse gas emissions from heating our homes and buildings, leaving them greener, warmer and more efficient. And the time is coming where we must take leaps, not strides, and we must work collectively to scale up our efforts to tackle emissions. Now, reducing emissions from our buildings, we know, requires the retrofitting of almost all of our 2.6 million or so buildings in use today. It will mean making them more energy efficient, as well as ensuring that the heat is supplied from zero emission sources. Right now, the main zero-emission heating systems available are electric heat pumps and heat networks. In the longer term, after a successful demonstration, hydrogen may have a role to play, and we want to see the rate of renewable heat installations fitted in new and existing homes and buildings at least double every year, from a current baseline of around 2,000 installations per year to around 64,000 fitted yearly by the middle of the decade. Now, energy efficiency improvements will need to underpin many of these installations, and we're beginning to further scale up and grow our investment. When the Scottish Government launched the Energy Efficient Scotland route map in 2018, it set two main objectives which remain steadfast today. Firstly, removing poor energy efficiency as a driver for fuel poverty, as mentioned earlier, and secondly, reducing greenhouse gas emissions by making buildings more energy efficient and decarbonising our heat supply. Now, in order to reinforce these objectives, we're bringing together the heat decarbonisation policy statement with the update to the Energy Efficient Scotland route map and combining them into a single strategic heat and building strategy for Scotland. I presume one of my colleagues in the Scottish Government must be a Hibs fan for coming up with that title. By combining these two important strategic documents, we can better ensure that our actions to reduce demand dovetail the necessary steps needed to ramp up the deployment and use of renewable heat. Investing in reducing the emissions from heating our homes and buildings will help support and underpin our green recovery, and the investment opportunity is significant. We estimate that for energy efficiency alone, for example, investment of between 10 to 12 billion pounds sterling is needed. Securing this investment from public and private sources will create jobs, strengthen supply chains, and promote green skills, as well as continuing to help further tackle fuel poverty. Now, it's important that we don't treat emission reduction and retrofitting the building stock as a purely technocratic exercise. And its core are people like you and me, and it's important that we're all taken along in this journey and that no one is left behind. Now, this year we've allocated more than £198 million to our domestic and non-domestic energy efficiency programmes, and by the end of 2021 we will have allocated over £1 billion since 2009 to tackle fuel poverty and improve energy efficiency to make homes warmer and cheaper to heat. Early successes which Energy Efficient Scotland continues to build on can be found in our delivery schemes. Warmer Homes Scotland and Scotland's local authority-led area-based schemes are two good examples. And since the Warmer Homes Scotland scheme commenced just over 5 years ago, over 20,000 households have been helped to have warmer homes with more affordable energy costs, saving customers on average over £320 annually on their bills. And through Warmer Homes Scotland, the installation of low carbon and renewable heating measures continues to grow, and we're looking for opportunities now to continue to innovate and increase the number of renewable heating measures installed. To date, measures delivered through Warmer Homes Scotland have saved 33,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide, helping make progress towards our climate change targets. But clearly that needs to expand very significantly. Like Warmer Homes Scotland, local delivery through the area-based schemes remains at the heart of our approach. The area-based schemes have helped more than 91,000 households since their inception, and these schemes traditionally focused on fabric measures like wall insulation, but now deliver an increasing number of renewable technologies, including air source heat pumps and solar photovoltaic cells. This year we've increased funding for area-based schemes to £65 million and have increased the funding available per household, enabling our local government partners to deliver more measures to more households at risk of fuel poverty. Now, we recognise that more needs to be done to accelerate and scale up action to tackle fuel poverty and to decarbonise Scotland's homes and buildings. In September, I opened a new £50 million low carbon energy project capital funding invitation through our Low Carbon Infrastructure Transition Programme, or LCITP, which will be familiar to many of you. And we're now accepting expressions of interest from capital-ready projects which can demonstrate innovative low-carbon heat solutions and integrated energy systems and contribute towards Scotland's green recovery. This is in addition to the LCITP Social Housing Net Zero Heat Funding Invitation, which launched in August, targeting a total investment of £20 million over the course of the financial year. And last week, many of you may know, we opened a new £4 million SME loan cashback scheme to support Scottish organisations install renewable heating systems and energy efficiency measures in their premises. Eligible businesses can access grant support of up to £20,000 to help towards the cost of installing energy efficiency and renewable heat measures. And this additional investment brings our total investment in our SME support schemes to £8 million this year. Now, since its launch in 2008, the SME loan scheme has paid over £29 million in loans, funding more than 1,100 projects with an estimated total cost saving to businesses of over £55 million. And we want to see more properties improved right across the board. So therefore, I'm pleased to announce today that an additional £4.5 million for an expanded cashback and interest-free loan offer for Scottish householders to stimulate the uptake of renewable heat and energy efficiency measures will open for applications early next month. The scheme will be accessible via Home Energy Scotland and will offer up to 75% cashback on loans for renewable heating technologies up to a maximum value of £10,000 and up to 40% cashback against energy efficiency measures up to a maximum value of £6,000. And longer term, we're committed to growing the Scottish Government's investment in this area, and as confirmed in this year's programme for government, we'll invest £1.6 billion over the next Parliament to expand and accelerate our heat and energy efficiency programmes as part of a green recovery. Throughout this investment, we expect to support at least 3,000 jobs related to renewable heat and energy efficiency, growing to at least 5,000 by the middle of the decade. The Low Carbon Infrastructure Transition Programme is, of course, as many know, due to come to an end in 2021. And we're keen to continue its success, and we will be launching a call for evidence on a successor programme to extend our support for innovative and low-carbon heat projects in the coming months. I know there's huge interest in what happens post-LCITP, and I would really encourage all in this conference to take part in that consultation and give your feedback on the issues we raise. Now, standards and regulation are clearly going to be vital to driving and ensuring delivery on progress on heat and energy efficiency. And the Energy Efficiency Standard for Social Housing, or EISH for short, set a single minimum energy efficiency rating for social landlords to achieve. The first milestone is due to be met this year, and social landlords are well on the way to achieving the milestone, with 84% of the 600,000 social rented homes in Scotland already meeting the standard, which is excellent. EISH paved the way for minimum energy efficiency standards, and we remain committed to introducing standards in other sectors where appropriate. Regulations were due to come into force on the 1st of April 2020, which would have set minimum energy efficiency standards for new private rented tenancies from October of this year. Reluctantly, we didn't launch the regulations as planned due to the COVID-19 crisis. We will, however, set out our approach to regulating energy efficiency of the private rented sector alongside our proposals for owner-occupied housing in the heat and building strategy later this year. We also remain committed to ensuring that new homes are fit for the future and don't need further retrofitting. And later this month, our first consultation on our 2024 new build standard will go live. And I would like to encourage you all again to participate in the scoping consultation, which is the first of two consultations. A second technical consultation is due next year. Clearly both are important, so please do feed into those. We're also working with partners to develop a new net zero carbon standard for new public buildings. An application of this voluntary standard to new build and major refurbishment projects of public sector buildings will support heat decarbonisation, high levels of energy efficiency and modern methods of low carbon construction. Once agreed, this new standard will build on actions in existing buildings with our new non-domestic energy efficiency framework and SALIX loans already supporting and driving action in the public sector. Now, as I mentioned at the start, it's important that we don't treat emissions reductions and retrofitting the building stock as a technical or technocratic exercise. At its core are people, and the success of all our delivery programs is dependent on individuals taking action. We know that there is still a long way to go in capturing the hearts and minds of the majority of property owners with regards to energy efficiency and renewable heating. And our independent and impartial advice services, Home Energy Scotland and Energy Efficiency Business Support Service, formerly Resource Efficient Scotland, are helping to increase awareness, and our delivery schemes are helping to prove that improvements are worthwhile, make a difference, and are not simply something that should be feared. We need to continue together, of course, to capture the public interest and raise awareness of these technologies and what is needed. We know that community and neighbourhood-based projects have a key role to play in reaching out to consumers. Our community and renewable energy scheme or CARES, supports the growth of community and locally owned energy in Scotland, and we will continue to involve this scheme in the future. The key to ensuring support and buy-in to this transition will be local engagement and involvement in planning and designing solutions. With that in mind, local heat and energy efficiency strategies, or LHEES, will have a very important function in supporting the heat transition and will include community participation in their design, as well as being important tools to communicate what changes are planned and when they can be expected. LHEES will help define and drive the action needed on heat decarbonisation and energy efficiency improvement. Excuse me. These local strategies will help identify the changes needed for heat in buildings over the next 15 to 20 years, with delivery plans setting out nearer term actions. And we're working with local government partners in COSLA to bring these strategies forward and want to see strategies in place across Scotland by the end of 2023. Strategically, we obviously want to touch on important technologies and the supply chain, which is very topical at the moment. And as we transition, we're going to see new and different technologies in our homes and buildings. Heat pumps, heat networks, and possibly hydrogen, certainly keen to explore that, will feature in our lives more and more in the future. It will be important that we create the right conditions for these technologies to develop, that clear signals are given to the market, and that consumers are protected. Now, I was very pleased to introduce the Heat Network Scotland Bill to the Scottish Parliament in March of this year. The bill will put in place a clear regulatory framework to overcome investor and developer uncertainty and ultimately help to drive the growth of heat networks in Scotland. We will continue to work collaboratively with stakeholders and across Parliament to ensure the bill will deliver the transformational change needed to unlock the full potential of heat networks in Scotland. And as with heat networks, we're taking steps to strengthen frameworks to support the uptake of heat pumps. We've set up an expert group of manufacturers, installers and consumer bodies to make recommendations to develop a heat pump sector deal to support the sector to grow. The deal will build on our strong track record of existing support for heat pump projects, such as through our decarbonisation fund and LCITP funding. Hydrogen has the potential to help decarbonise key parts of the energy system in Scotland and contribute to achieving our net zero targets. The findings of the Hydrogen Assessment Project, which is now nearing completion, will help build the evidence base to inform the development of the Hydrogen Policy Statement for the Scottish Government and an action plan. The statement will be published alongside the Climate Change Plan update before the end of this calendar year. And as I conclude, it's important to look to the future. We can all agree, I hope, that we want Scotland to have warmer, greener and more efficient buildings. The road ahead of us is a long one, but we are on our way and have fantastic schemes and programmes in place, which we must build on and continue to evolve as we expand our investment. The Heat and Building Strategy, which we'll publish later this year, will further set out our ambition and the steps we'll take to continue to accelerate our efforts. And if I can end as I began, the time is coming where we must take leaps, and that the time is coming where we must be ready. Thank you very much, and I'll hand back to Ragni.
Thank you very much, Minister. We have some questions coming in, which is great, picking up on some of the points in that speech. The first one is on area-based schemes. And the question is, do you anticipate that area-based schemes will change from predominantly concerned with installing insulation, to low carbon and energy measures? I think that's a really interesting question.
Yes, it's a really good one, Raggy. I mean, I think obviously we touched on in the speech, there's already some examples of existing funding schemes where we are sort of widening the scope of what is covered by the funding to try and look at more integrated solutions, to look at renewable heat opportunities as well as purely fabric measures. So we've got strong interest obviously in heat pumps, building heat networks, looking at how hydrogen can play a role in delivering heat as well. So I would hope that we can use all our funding schemes to try and achieve our goals. It's worth stating, it wasn't obvious in the speech, but the 75% reduction in emissions that we have to achieve by 2030, which goes 5% beyond what the Committee on Climate Change said is possible, inevitably means that we are really facing stretching targets and need to use all possible technologies and all potential interventions to try and make that progress by 2030. So certainly open-minded and certainly keen to hear from stakeholders as to what they believe is potential. The potential is to tackle those kind of issues, Raggy. But certainly, I would imagine that we'd be keen to see integrated solutions and looking at both renewable heat technologies and fabric measures.
Okay, thank you. Excellent. So there's now a question on LHEES, which is dear to my own heart. A question about when a duty might be in place for local authorities to produce local heat and energy efficiency strategies. What sort of timing do you think?
Well, we want to have discussion. I'm hoping to have discussion with Councillor Stephen Heddle from COSLA perspective, who's the portfolio holder for COSLA in the next few weeks, just to have a discussion with Stephen about progress here. So I don't want to necessarily preempt that, but we are looking to use the Climate Change Act provisions to bring forward secondary legislation that would put in place a duty for the delivery of LHEES. And we've set out in the speech, we aim to try and ensure that all of Scotland is covered by LHEES by the end of 2023. That's to try and tie in with the work we'd have to do if the Heat Network Bill passes, which we hope obviously it will do. It seems to have broad support in Parliament. We would then follow that up with an extensive programme of secondary legislation through the Delegated Powers Committee in the Scottish Parliament, and that will take us to 2023 to get in place all the underpinning legislation. Having LHEES ready by 2023 ties in with that, and then we'd hope we have a coherent package of legislation, regulatory framework, and indeed underpinning demand evidence that would support inward investors and local investors in developing heat network projects in Scotland. So there's a lot to do between now and 2023. We'll discuss timing and the precise method and provisions that we want to take forward with COSLA in the very near future, and I'd hope to be able to say more about that once we've had Councillor Heddle's input to that process.
Fantastic. So a slightly different question now about the differential between, effectively between gas and electricity prices and the effect that has on the ability to make a commercial case, particularly non-domestic sector projects, the ability to make a commercial case for a low carbon heat project. So this is taking, I think, an example from the NHS around spending or paying 6 times the cost of gas for a unit of electricity, which makes even the most efficient heat pump projects extremely difficult to present a commercial case for, particularly with the RHI coming to an end. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on those comments and whether there's anything you can say about actions to address rising electricity prices and that differential between gas and electricity.
Yeah, I mean, it's a point I recognise. It's been raised by quite a few stakeholders, and certainly in recent months in engagement with them. And I do recognise that obviously the markets, which we don't have any direct either regulatory or legislative role in overseeing in terms of gas and electricity markets, those are specifically reserved to UK ministers in the Scotland Act 1998 and revisions to the Act since then. So we don't have any direct power over those markets to influence prices and to close that gap. But it's certainly an issue that we have to address. So obviously we have funding schemes in place. We are putting together, as I said, through a working group, a package around heat pumps in terms of sector deal there to try and bring forward a package of measures that could, pump prime, no pun intended, the heat pump market and to try and get that going. So obviously in terms of capital funding, we might be able to help reduce kind of cost differentials between the overall cost of a project, but we can't do anything fundamentally about the electricity prices versus gas, and that's where we look to UK government and the regulators to try and help influence these matters. And I know the UK government is obviously looking at measures around the gas market. We've obviously been engaging with them in terms of consultations on the future of those kind of market mechanisms, and would hope that would play a role in trying to make alternatives to using fossil fuels more attractive. As I outlined, we've also got measures in place or developing them to influence the building standards and regulation of our public buildings and non-domestic buildings to try and make sure that we are using regulatory powers, which we do have in Scotland, to ensure that there's a driver to move away from fossil fuels from 2024 onwards. And Mr. Stewart and myself and other colleagues are looking very closely at what we can do to also provide incentives. Hence some of the schemes we've got in place around the SME loan fund and new provisions for incentivisation of householders to switch to alternative technologies to try and demonstrate the value of these technologies and to build confidence in the market as well. So there's a lot of things we can do outside of direct price interventions, but we obviously look to UK ministers and regulators as well to reflect the need to try and close that gap and make it more attractive to use alternatives to fossil fuels.
Thank you. So there's quite a few questions still, but I think we probably have time for two more. We'll see how we go. There's one interesting one on the role for organised community groups, such as development trusts, in developing and delivering local retrofit and heat schemes. I wonder if you could say a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting one. We've obviously done a lot of work, Raggy, on community-led projects in respect of renewables and renewable technologies, particularly wind and hydro, and increasingly solar as well. But I'd certainly be keen to see what more we can do. Obviously, the loss of feed-in tariffs has had a big impact on potentially on community-led renewable projects, but there's clearly so much to do on energy efficiency and renewable heat that I would hope there'd be great scope for this. We're certainly keen through the Heat Networks Bill to create a framework which is supportive of community-led heat network projects or local authority-led projects as well as private sector ones. And we're obviously doing quite a bit of work at a local level with individual communities on looking at local energy strategies and trying to do some pioneering work there. I'm quite optimistic that through CARES and through the support we can provide in terms of funding and advice to community projects, that there would be scope for community-led projects there, and I'd be keen to hear from any community that's got some thoughts around that and is perhaps struggling to navigate its way through the system, because it would be certainly something we want to support and to ensure that there's transparent routes to producing those kind of projects at a local level, because I think they could be very impactful as we try and tackle the climate emergency, but also tackle fuel poverty, which are both equally important statutory targets for us. I hope that's helpful, but certainly keen, and I hope that perhaps in the later parts of the session there might be more scope for yourself, Raggy, and the team to give advice to any community groups that are interested in doing that. Development trusts are obviously a well-recognised and well-respected governance model, which is something we're used to dealing with, and there are indeed some development trusts that are already doing this kind of work in terms of retrofit and giving, I think, in Fintry, for example, energy efficiency grants to local householders. So there's some great trailblazers there already, but can we do more to support communities? Probably, and it'd be good to have an engagement about how we could do that and how we could bring forward community-led projects and perhaps ambitious ones around heat networks as well in due course.
Great. So please, as the Minister says, for those interested in that, do get in touch. Feel free to do so. Get in touch with me or post more questions later on in the chat box. A final question then. So this is again a slightly different topic. Back to the standards for the private. So the private rented sector and owner occupiers, I think, private housing. Can you tell us more about the standards to be set for private households and any plans for introducing regulations to require action by owners of homes?
Well, clearly, as I kind of mentioned in my speech, Raggy, that we were due to have regulations come into force on the 1st of April of this year. That would have set a minimum energy efficiency standard for both new private rented tenancies from October of this year. and we reluctantly decided not to do so because of the COVID-19 crisis and impact on those affected by the regulations in terms of the ability to meet the standards over that timescale. We will, Mr. Stewart, Kevin Stewart, the Housing Minister and Planning Minister, is leading on development and outlining our proposals for regulation of the private rented sector and the owner-occupied housing in the heat and building strategy, which we will launch, as I say, before Christmas. So we hope to be able to say much more about that in the very near future and give the detail that I'm sure colleagues online are looking for. I appreciate that's not immediate, but obviously we have to just make sure we have our ducks in a row on that before we publish and go through all the consultation internally before we do that. But as I say, we're also in parallel delivering a number of measures which will hopefully incentivise homeowners and indeed business owners to engage in and invest in both energy efficiency and renewable heat as well. So it's not all stick, there's carrot as well, and we hope that people take advantage of the opportunities that are available to them, and that we see good support for the development of the appropriate standards that Mr. Stewart will put in place.
Thank you very much, Minister. We are more or less bang on time. So I'm proposing that we don't take further questions, but thank you for a great keynote speech and for bringing us up to date with a range of things for the new announcement and for answering a really diverse range of questions, which have been great. So thank you to the audience as well for posing all of those. So thank you very much, Mr. Wheelhouse.
Thank you, Raggy, and thank you to all. And as usual, I get put through my paces in these events, as Judith knows. So I'm delighted to be here, and I just hope the rest of the conference is a very successful event, and that, as Judith said, everyone stays safe in the meantime. But I hope to see you all again physically in place next year. So all the best.
Thank you. Great, thank you very much. Well, I hope everyone found that informative and interesting, and there was a huge amount of coverage there of a really broad range of topics in relation to energy efficiency and heat. We're going to move on to look in a little bit more depth at certain aspects of that now. Firstly, with Mr. Sorry, I'm slightly in minister mode still. Andrew Hawley from Mott MacDonald, who's going to speak to us from their experience of working in the non-domestic sector.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Raggy, and thank you everyone for your time today. As mentioned, I'm actually just going to do a short presentation on the non-domestic energy efficiency framework. So it's one of the programs that government have developed to support an acceleration of investment in energy efficiency projects. The framework was set up by Scottish Futures Trust in 2014 and 2015 to support the public sector acting as exemplar organisations in the procurement and delivery of energy performance contracts. And specifically, the framework's really trying to facilitate an upscale in energy efficiency projects within the public sector, and then alongside that, the benefits that provides in respect of reduced emissions, saving money, importantly as well, but then the benefits of those in terms of meeting responsibilities. So our national and local decarbonisation targets the ability for these projects to really help that in the retrofit of our existing estate. And actually alongside that, providing building improvements by the improvement in both lighting and heat and controls of our building estate. So the framework is technology agnostic. It is an efficiency first approach framework. So it follows the energy hierarchy of a lean, clean, green, in respect of really looking at all aspects of retrofit energy efficiency improvement opportunities, which are led by the framework contractors. Importantly also, though, that the framework follows the be seen element in respect of metering and monitoring, and really just understanding that the savings that are realised as one of the key principles of energy performance contracts, and the same within the NDE framework, is that effectively payment to framework contractors it is linked to these guaranteed savings. So there's detailed measurement and verification activities that go alongside the projects to give confidence to framework users that the investment is actually going to achieve its ultimate aims through the verification of these savings. Some of the other benefits of the framework and how it's been set up is the deployment of specialist contractors that I'll touch on briefly. That there is a project support unit that is funded by Scottish Government to really support acceleration of these schemes. And actually, probably one of the key things is the standardisation of processes and documents. So one of the things that Scottish Futures Trust and their advisors worked on was actually the streamlining of these types of projects and focusing bespoke contracts such that these projects can really focus on the technical aspects and that actually the contractual, legal and procurement side of things is relatively streamlined for such big projects, which was typically otherwise a blocker. And also the framework does work interface with capital funding opportunities. So things like Salix Finance we work very closely with, the government grants, obviously the loans and capital reserves of organisations, but also as we move forward with the framework in its new iteration, trying to leverage private sector funding to really upscale projects. So a little bit of information about the project support unit. So it's an external advisory entity operated by Mott MacDonald and our partners that really look to provide project management, technical advisory and procurement advisory support to the public sector. And it's a grant-funded support unit, and it's really the need for it is a resource and skill capacity that hopefully leverages the framework public bodies to use the framework, and otherwise that would be resource constrained. So in terms of projects today, we've helped to deliver or currently in development 32 projects across the different public and third sector organisations. It's seen a retrofit in energy efficiency opportunities across 300 plus buildings, and there's a commitment to date of 27.5 million of capital, which is looking to leverage about 3.3 million of predicted annual energy savings, and based on carbon factors at the time, equivalent to about 17,000 tonnes of carbon saved as either delivered or predicted. So one of the things I did want to just pick up on today was the diversity of the framework users. So one of the really positive things is the different sectors using this standardised route, working with higher education and further education, numerous local authorities, leisure trusts, and more recently with NHS boards, where there's typically been a bit of an issue in terms of accessing finance. But across all these sectors, we're really learning lessons and being able to then help each of these entities with a bit of knowledge sharing across the issues or the opportunities that we find with projects, and that's been one of the really great success factors, is the diversity that we've worked with. Given the predominance of local authorities in using the framework initially, there is quite a focus on schools and sort of education establishments as terms of the building mix, but as this graphic looks to show, that there is a diversity of buildings that are being retrofitted, which again is a real benefit in understanding the opportunities and some of the challenges that go with investing in retrofit energy efficiency opportunities. In terms of technology mix, and as talked about earlier, it is a blend of different projects. There is quite a focus on LED lighting, one given its potential simplicity but also its effectiveness, but then there is another blend of different technologies and opportunities through the different projects, and heat does form part of it, as we touched on earlier, and as some of those questions were asking. Given that the framework focuses on effectively guaranteed savings, there is a predominance of electricity project savings in initial projects, but as we move from different metrics based solely on finance to looking at things like whole life carbon savings, we are seeing more of a predominance of heat type opportunities. So the original framework of contractors operated between 2016 and 2020, and Scottish Government procurement have now more recently procured 2 new frameworks for projects above £1 million, and then for smaller entities, projects below £1 million. And you can see here from these slides just the different specialist contractors that support the delivery of the projects, and they all work with different specialisms, but all bring specialist energy performance contracting experience to delivery. One of the things, just looking to sort of conclude on really, is some of the lessons learned that we've found from the delivery of the framework, and one of the real positives has been the opportunity to upscale projects in the public sector. So really seen a step change from individual projects to looking to pull together a number of buildings or larger buildings, that we have a bundle of projects that are delivered at once, really accelerating investment. We've also seen programs of work, so multiple framework users have done second, now looking at third projects, which is brilliant, and all of those have talked about the benefits of the standardized processes, so streamlining the procurement and the contractual side of things, which would potentially otherwise block us. Some of the other key lessons learned has also been the knowledge sharing. So the project support unit has been well received in respect of providing central support and central data and analytics and lessons learned, but also the peer-to-peer sharing that different framework users have been able to provide in providing similar projects and helping each other in terms of capacity building and resource and sharing of good practice. Ultimately, there also has been the benefit of the savings guarantee and the fact that there is this measurement and verification approach giving confidence that savings will be realised from investment. And that really is a key aspect in terms of helping the business case and helping the financial teams of the framework users be engaged and actively supportive. As we move forward with new framework projects, there is a bit more of a focus on low carbon heat. That the challenge, as raised in the questions, it will come on the commercial case. As I say, we are looking to have to look at different metrics in terms of what the success of these projects are, not just necessarily financial savings, but whole life carbon. And we are also looking at how projects like the framework can support things like the delivery of LHEES, at least the energy efficiency side of geographic locations of buildings. And finally, just really picking up on the future of trying to leverage different finance mechanisms, particularly for the NHS, who have had challenges in the past in terms of getting the real money that's required to improve their estate, and the benefits that these types of projects will deliver. And just lastly, just leaving a few different quotes from some of the local authorities, just to prove that programs like this are really influential and supportive in helping us accelerate and upscale efficiency projects and the benefits that the framework and the PSU have provided. So just like to say thank you very much for your time and listening. We'll put an email address up there if there is any direct questions separate to the framework at any point in time, but I'll hand you back to Raggy.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Really comprehensive, and I'd encourage, I think there are some questions coming through, so we'll collect them at the end and put them to the panel as a whole, but please do continue just to pop questions into the chat box, and we'll pick those up as we go. So next up is Fiona Boyd from Highland Council, who's Sustainability Officer there, who's going to give us a local authority perspective.
Good morning, thank you. So I'm going to aim today is just to give you, I've got a quick presentation just to give you some idea of the sort of things that we at the Highland Council are doing to help try and achieve the energy efficient Scotland standards that are out there. So just to quickly give you some context of our council, so we cover about a third of Scotland's landmass, and it is primarily quite remote rural settlements that we have, not a lot of access to the mains gas grid, and a lot of our houses and non-domestic properties rely on oil or electricity to heat themselves. So that can bring up some obstacles for energy efficiency, but does mean we have a lot of opportunities to really help people lift them out of fuel poverty and make a lot of carbon savings. So primarily the main way we kind of deliver a lot of our energy efficient standards, trying to meet those, is through the Energy Efficient Programme Scotland. For those of you who aren't aware, it's a Scottish Government programme aimed at private domestic properties. So for us, it's primarily been an external wall insulation scheme that we've been delivering with our 8th year now. But we've also done some cavity wall insulation too, and we've also tried to target some non-traditional building types. You can see in this picture we've got a Swedish timber property, which is a system-built property. This scheme has been really successful for reducing the amounts that the homeowners pay, so helping people in fuel poverty, reducing their carbon emissions, but as you can also see from this picture, really uplifting the areas that we target, because it does make such a visual difference to the street once we have that external wall insulation on. So moving forward, we're now kind of delivering our HEEPS-AB scheme under the umbrella of Energy Efficient Scotland with a couple of other different offerings too. So we're continuing with external wall insulation to our solid stone properties. This year we've also been able to offer first-time central heating. So we're installing air source heat pumps into homes that don't have any central heating. Our delivery partner E.ON have also been able to offer up their own cavity and loft insulation scheme so that we can deliver these measures free of charge to the homeowner. And we're levering in UK government funding through EcoFlex, so we're using that to top up our HEEPS-AB grant to try and reduce the amount that we're asking homeowners to pay. Also this year we've got Warm Homes Fund, so again we're topping it up to be able to offer the air source heat pumps free of charge where we can to homeowners. So kind of looking at a larger picture, with our HEEPS-AB schemes, we're generally planning 1 to 3 years, but now with local heat and energy efficiency strategy, the LHEES, we're able to start looking at what we have to do to be planning in a longer term. So we participated in the Scottish Government's Phase 1 pilot. We focused on part of Inverness for this, and really what was the most interesting thing we got out of this was understanding what an LHEES could be, how big that undertaking is, the sort of upskilling we need to do within our organisation to be able to make that happen. So we've continued along with this kind of this thought process, and we're part of a knowledge sharing group with a few other local authorities where we aim to obviously share our knowledge but work together on developing LHEES methodology. We're very kindly supported in this by Zero Waste Scotland and the Scottish Government, and through this group has been able to produce a tool for high-level targeting of areas. We've been able to test this, and it's been made available to all other local authorities in Scotland. Currently, this group has another couple of working streams on the go. They're looking at producing tools for targeting areas in fuel poverty, looking at how to target areas for district heating, and also looking at low regret heating upgrades in off-gas areas. Another way that we're trying to integrate beyond the kind of formally what the Scottish Government is giving us is we're looking how to integrate Energy Efficient Scotland and LHEES into other work streams that we have as the Council. So a good example of this is the Fort William 2040 plan. For those of you who aren't aware, Fort William is due to see a lot of investment and growth in the next few years. So the Council has produced this plan detailing out what will be happening in the town over the next few years up to 2040. So the Highland Council, along with Highlands and Islands Enterprise, we're planning to make an energy plan to fit alongside all these developments. Feedback from the community in Fort William is that carbon emissions and energy efficiency is something that is quite important to them, and they want to see considered in these kind of long-term plans. So again, we're kindly supported by Zero Waste Scotland in some of this work, and through them we've been able to get in place a strategy review document that's helped set out the steps we need to take to make an energy plan for this whole area. And again, working with them, we're currently focusing on Blarmore, which is due to see some new housing developments, and we're looking at how energy can be integrated in this kind of early planning stage of the housing development, and how it can integrate with the area around it in terms of the non-domestic buildings that surround that area, if that's utilising waste heat or if it's district heating. And this thinking has also helped us align our working with our planning colleagues closer, and we're also considering energy in the Inner Firth local development plan, which is currently going on, to make sure that energy is a consideration with other planning and development and regeneration plans on the go. So there are other future projects that we're trying to work into under the Energy Efficient Scotland umbrella that we hope will help achieve those targets. What we currently want to do is undertake a desktop audit on domestic properties to see what construction types we have in the Highland. This is primarily to help us identify non-traditional construction types such as the Swedish timber or no fines properties, so that we can properly target them and offer them energy efficiency measures that are suited to their property. We currently find these kind of houses slip through the gaps in terms of data. We're also working closely with our housing colleagues to assess the best route to reaching EPC-C on all of our council domestic properties, so that we're in line with the highest EIS standards and we can work our way towards there. And again, we're looking at in future years been offering PV and battery storage under the Energy Efficient Scotland scheme. So as we've done a lot of insulation, we're now moving away from that fabric delivery and seeing what else we can do in terms of energy efficiency and low carbon delivery. So that was a very quick whistle-stop tour through what we do as the council. There's lots more that I don't have time to mention here, but please feel free to drop a question in the chat or drop me a line later if there's anything else that you want to question or want more clarity on. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions on this. Thank you.
Slight gap there. Thank you so much, Fiona. Excellent. And the questions are coming in thick and fast, so thank you for that. I'll try and do justice to them when we come to the panel discussion. But just to keep us on time, I will pass over now to Kate Dupre from NHS National Services Scotland, who's Head of Energy and Sustainability, and I'm sure is familiar to many of you, who's going to talk to us from an NHS perspective about heat and energy efficiency.
Hi, good morning everybody. I am going to touch on heat and energy efficiency, but I'm going to bring this back a little bit more strategic, and I'll pick up any questions on really specific projects as we get into the questions. But I wanted to talk to you about our general approach to how we are now planning to achieve a net zero NHS Scotland, and tell you a bit about our achievements on the way to get there. I should also say, as well as being Head of Energy and Sustainability with NHS National Services Scotland, I'm also Chair of the Sustainable Scotland Network steering group, which represents all of the public sector in Scotland. Sorry, why is my slide not moving on? The first thing to say is that we have been, within the NHS, we've been working on the auspices of a climate emergency for a long time. I know in 2019 this really came to the forefront and lots of organisations declared climate emergencies, but as long ago as 2009, the Lancet, the World Health Organisation, recognised this as being, at the time, the biggest global health threat of the 21st century. So we have always taken this extremely seriously within the NHS. Within Scotland, just to give you some statistics, we run about 1,500 buildings across Scotland, of which 200 of those are hospitals, and they range from the Queen Elizabeth in Glasgow being our biggest, right down to really small community hospitals, and in some cases in some of the islands it is literally almost a small domestic house with a resident nurse. But we've got offices, we have depots, we've got laundries, we've got pretty well every building type you can imagine across that estate. Right now those buildings collectively account for round about 340,000 tonnes of CO2, but on top of that we also have the impact from our waste stream, from the more than 9,000 vehicles that we operate, and obviously our supply chain as well is absolutely huge. In addition to the impact from our estate, obviously we have this massive workforce as well. About 6% of Scotland work in some way for the NHS, not including our contractors. So we do have that influence as well. And so that's why we see that we have this moral obligation, as well as just the sheer physicality of the estate, to get to a net zero position and to support Scottish Government policies in this area. Globally, the impact of healthcare, this report came out last year from ARIPS in conjunction with Healthcare Without Harm, and that estimated that globally healthcare accounts for about 4.5% of emissions, slightly higher in the UK, but you know, there or thereabouts. And again, to make the point that the majority of that is indirect emissions, probably from our supply chain. So it is extremely important, if we are going to meet Paris Agreement targets, if we are going to mitigate and reduce temperature rise, and if we are going to make national targets, healthcare plays a big role in this. But perhaps more importantly for us, it's the impact of climate change on healthcare and on the NHS operations, which is really important. One thing that's become really, really clear in the pandemic over the last few months is the impact of health inequalities, and these are rising. And similar to COVID, climate change impacts those most vulnerable in our society the worst, and we have to tackle that. This carries a big burden on the NHS and a big financial cost to the NHS. Just fuel poverty, the Minister mentioned earlier before, that is a policy priority area for Scottish Government. Fuel poverty right now for NHS Scotland costs us in the region of £80 million per annum, dealing with things like respiratory illness, like mental illness that come from having poor households. Poor air quality, which is predominantly caused by emissions from transport and buildings, accounts for 2,000 premature deaths per annum in Scotland, and again carries a huge cost to us. But what we're starting to see more is the physical and mental health impacts of climate events, particularly around things like flooding. We see people now presenting with post-traumatic stress, with anxiety, particularly amongst our young people, and that again is really worrying to the NHS in terms of how do we cope. And then as we transition, we have these bigger climate events that will have an impact on our ability to actually deliver that service. So what do we do if the infrastructure goes down? What do we do if our hospitals are flooded? So all of this, it makes it really important to us that we tackle this as well. We have done quite well, particularly on our estate, and I don't think we've shouted about this enough. So excuse me while I brag for a minute, but since 1990, which is the baseline year of the Climate Change Act, we have reduced our CO2 emissions by more than 62% across our estate. And just in terms of energy consumption, we're down by more than 43%. So from the NHS point of view, we are well ahead of Scottish targets, and we're quite proud of those figures. However, if that's where we are now, we've got a long way to go if we're going to hit targets. If we decarbonise, if the grid completely decarbonises, it will only get us there. That's where we need to be by 2030 to meet Scottish Government targets. That's why we need to be by 2040, and obviously the line has to be at 0 by 2045. To date, we've done that 62%. I use this phrase a lot. We've done it by sustainability by stealth, I call it. So we've done huge efforts around our energy systems. We've really upped the game in terms of our new buildings. We actually have technically the first zero carbon hospital now in Scotland, but we will not get to that net zero position now without taking a much more radical approach, and without now involving every element of every person within our organisation, every element of organisations, our staff, our patients, our visitors. The other thing that was really important is we do not want to treat climate change in isolation. It's important for us to tackle the broader sustainability outcomes in this. The UN Sustainable Development Goals, most of those are directly or indirectly related to health. So again, really important for us that we don't tackle climate change in a way that disempowers particular parts of society or makes some of these other sustainability outcomes worse. And also to make sure that we do this, that we minimise our other environmental impacts. So again, not just climate change impacts, but things like some of the chemicals that we're putting into water courses, the impact of pharmaceuticals, all of these kind of things. So it's important that we get this right from that point of view as well. So we're currently working on a new climate change and sustainability strategy, which has been delayed like everything else from COVID, but should be out sometime this year. And the key thing is that we are taking up that holistic approach. So it will look at climate change, but it will also look at the broader sustainability outcomes and take into account environmental compliance. But to kick us off last year, we got our chief executives in NHS Scotland to agree to 6 initial high-level climate change commitments. And up front and centre is the commitment to be a net zero organisation by 2045, but underneath that you'll see that we've said from April of this year all new buildings will be designed to be net zero carbon, and we're working now on we're looking at doing net zero route maps to get the rest of our estate to the same position. In terms of tackling the wider sustainability, we created this new branding last year, Sustainability Action, Our NHS, Our People, Our Planet, and we are now assessing our boards across 16 focus areas relating to sustainability. So greenhouse gases are in there, environmental management's in there, but also things like ethical issues, welfare, sustainable care. So it was, again, to emphasise to us it's important that we get this holistic approach. Last thing I want to leave you with is that quote I put right at the start about climate change being recognised as the biggest health threat. The same committee 6 years later changed the wording, and I think climate change is scary, the impacts are potentially scary, but if we get this right, if we tackle this correctly, if we make these amazing changes within our estate, then we have got the potential to the opportunities for greater carbon reduction, and the opportunities that provides us in terms of health co-benefits are only good. So that same committee now recognise that tackling climate change is that biggest global health opportunity. And I'm going to leave you with that positive message, and thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kate, and great to be left with a positive message. And can I just say to all 3 panelists and to the Minister who's not with us just now, how inspiring I think those were as presentations in terms of the on-the-ground action that's happening at pace across a range of different projects and different organisations. It's a really encouraging. It's been a really encouraging session from that perspective, and really great to see. I'm going to try to do 2 things now. One is to sort of pose some general questions to all of you, but I'll call you out in name so you know who's to speak when. And then there'll be some specific questions that have come in for each of you in particular. So just some general questions, I think, some really good questions. But the first one, which I'll put to Andrew first, I'd like everyone to comment on it, is really about knowledge sharing and involving a wider range of organisations and the public in learning and understanding some of these issues and the actions that we're taking. So this is, I guess, drawing particularly on your presentation, Andrew, but I think it's really relevant for the others as well. How will learning and knowledge be shared with professionals, communities and the public? Can there be case studies and KPIs? Will there be workshops and seminars to help train young people and communities? We really need the rich knowledge here to be disseminated far and wide and long term in every community and for active volunteers. So Andrew, if you want to address that first.
Yeah, sure. It's a really, really good question. And I think certainly as the project support unit, one of the benefits that we have is sort of sharing the knowledge of the different projects with the public sector organisations in terms of the ability to share the sort of the outcomes, case studies, KPIs with the users of the framework or potential users of the framework. And we operate sort of knowledge sharing in peer-to-peer discussions and organisations within that scope. I think the discussion in terms of the wider public or other professionals and communities is a really interesting one and something that should be explored more. We are developing a number of case studies for these types of projects, and we do try and pick up some of the ugly as well as the benefits of the projects and where to go, and they will be going up on the website for the framework shortly. So just working with Scottish Government procurement for that. I think almost activities like this, the sharing of the knowledge through conferences like this is one of the really good ways to spread the message and the discussion. I think with other professionals, we have got an obligation on ourselves within our own networks and other elements to actually probably be more open with the knowledge and the data that we have to support that and the lessons that have learned well. There are already some good facilitations of that through the organisations and CIBSE and the likes like that I work within. But I think in terms of the community involvement and the upskilling, I think that's something that could be done centrally, but also within the individual projects. And there's certainly a big push under this new framework for the framework contractors to be extending community benefits and local benefits to upskill local resource and specialists within this, because I think that is a known gap that we're going to have to try and fill if we're going to accelerate to the extent that we need to.
Great, thank you. Fiona, I'll come to you next and then to Kate.
Yeah, I think there's lots of good knowledge sharing opportunities currently taking place amongst local authorities. The Scottish Government helps facilitate a lot of these, whether they're the HEEPS officers meetings or there's now an LHEES working group. There's also lots of informal kind of council working groups sharing knowledge as well. And then being part of public sector with bodies such as SEON, there's lots of ways that we can share our knowledge. I think for the public, LHEES is going to be a really great vehicle to start engaging with the public and sharing what we're doing. I think there's a good opportunity to kind of look at what our traditional planning colleagues do when they do consultations with the members of the community, and looking at all the Fort William 2040. There's been a lot of engagement with the community over that, and encouragingly community bringing up energy and wanting to have a discussion on that. So I think LHEES and all those processes is going to be a great chance to start sharing knowledge with the public and just opening those conversations up between public and public sector workers.
Fantastic. Kate?
Yeah, I'm just going to put my SSN hat on for a minute and promote the Sustainable Scotland Network for a minute as a way that they do a lot of best practice sharing. I mean, it's been trickier this year, but running events and trying to get people together. I think one of the unique opportunities we perhaps have in Scotland is we're relatively small. I mean, even within the NHS, for example, we have only 22 boards as opposed to down in England where they've got like 140 trusts. So we can and we do get everybody around the table fairly regularly to talk about things that we're doing and to share best practice. We've got a sustainability website that we've started putting case studies on. As I said, SSN has its website. We're starting to look at case studies. I do think it's really important. But the other thing I would say is that we need to encourage more collaborative working, particularly I think between the public sector. There is a tendency to work in our own little bubbles, and climate change does not recognise organisational boundaries or geographical boundaries, and it's good to see that there are more area-based solutions starting to come forward. I don't think we should be afraid of sharing best practice, and I think there's been a tendency, again, particularly in the public sector, that sometimes we don't like to talk about what we've done, or we sometimes get embarrassed about shouting about a big project because you might get accused that you're spending too much in terms of taxpayers' money, when actually, you know, there are really good things that we should be talking about. So I don't know how we do more of it, but more opportunities and maybe encouraging, particularly in the public sector, to shout about projects more, you know, what's worked really well would be great.
Great, thank you. Question about supply chain, which I think was sort of directed mostly at Kate, but probably applies, I think, across the piece, which is about how as organisations and through the NDE framework and so on, we can support decarbonisation of the wider supply chain. So how do we do that, given the significance of that for our net zero ambitions? So I'll start with you, Kate, since it was sort of directed largely at you, but I think it applies across the board.
The approach that we're trying to do within the NHS is we've identified about half of our spend comes from 100 suppliers. So we are now tackling those 100 suppliers directly, doing individual conversations with them all about what can they do to decarbonise, and that, you know, ultimately decarbonise their supply chain. Unfortunately, the public sector, we are bound by really, really strict public sector procurement rules, and sometimes they actually preclude us from putting in requirements around particular environmental standards or particular decarbonisation strategies. We can't, you know, we may be seen to be disadvantaging SMEs, for example, or whatever. I know there's a huge amount of work happening now in Scottish Government, that they've set up a procurement forum where we're trying to tackle those areas. But yeah, from an NHS point of view, we're going to our individual suppliers, looking specifically at what they're doing, and then saying, well, we're asking you now as the customer, deliver us these products in a way that is more environmentally friendly, has less carbon, always with the lens of infection control comes first. You can imagine our supply chain has just been bonkers in the last 12 months, and a lot of environmental considerations have, not going to say gone away, but they've maybe gone down the list of priorities as we were just trying to get PPE through the door. But yeah, I mean, it's doing that direct engagement with suppliers and not being afraid to do that direct engagement with suppliers. Most of them are willing to work on this. You know, if you tell them that you want a decarbonised product, they'll trip over themselves to provide it for you. It's just that they're kind of always waiting to be asked. So yeah, work with the suppliers.
Great. Fiona, do you have any other reflections on that?
I agree a lot with what Kate said there. I think it is just a case of, you know, engaging community is also engaging with your local supply chain and opening up those conversations. And I think that is a big part of that. You can't get anything if you don't ask for it, if you don't start those conversations. So I think that is quite a big one, is engaging with them on those issues and being quite clear as an organisation, what is your priorities, so that's signalled out to your supply chain as well.
Great, thanks. Andrew?
Yeah, again, I definitely agree with what's already been said. I think that there is now a better understanding of net zero as well, excuse me, across it, in terms of things like embodied carbon and the impact of materials. The NDE focus is very much on operational energy and reducing operational demand, etc. But we obviously can't ignore the supply chain emissions and embodied carbon with that. I think it's perhaps just a bit more transparency, and it's asking the right questions of the bidders for that sort of transparency, and I think it's difficult to put KPIs on it, because I think sometimes the information is difficult to get because it's a very complex web. But I think just the more and more we can dig into it and ask the right questions and have that transparency, the easier and better it's going to become.
Great, thank you. I'm getting slightly blinded by the sun here and I don't have any curtains to draw, so apologies if I'm like just a white blob on your screen now. So this is a bit of a related question, and again for all of you, I think, on SMEs, and I think a reflection on different ways in which the Energy Efficient Scotland programme has successfully or not engaged SMEs, so both in terms of SME decarbonisation and energy efficiency, but also their engagement through the programme in providing services. So does the panel have any examples or suggestions to tackle what someone's describing as inertia in terms of SME involvement in this agenda? I'll maybe start with Andrew, so I think it's perhaps relevant in terms of the supply chain, and then Fiona.
Yeah, definitely. So obviously in terms of using the framework to deliver the projects, it is for the public and third sector rather than SMEs. The principles can be applied, and there is some work that's being done by BEIS to explore some of the benefits like measurement and verification and sort of incentivizing SMEs to be looking at delivering their own within their own estates. I think in terms of using SMEs in the delivery of projects, certainly the aspect of the new framework of under £1 million was set up to try and incentivize engagement of smaller organisations. I think positively with the NDE framework, the management contractors are effectively that they are the contractors that deliver the project, but they have an open supply chain to deliver the projects, and the diversity of the technologies and buildings we work on, we expect quite a diverse subcontracting supply chain, and there is certainly an incentive in the tenders that are put out to be exploring local trade and local SMEs, and I think that certainly is brought out in the evaluation of the proposal. So it's certainly an active thing that we're all wary of and keen to upskill locally and within the SMEs, both to deliver the projects but then understand the benefits for our whole estate.
Great. Fiona, anything in your reflections from Highland?
Yeah, sort of we're kind of coming at it in trying to engage SMEs in the Energy Efficient Scotland planning and the LHEES planning. That can be quite difficult, you know, even due to just not knowing who's there or what energy that they use. And I think it's part of a wider picture that, you know, to achieve all these standards, we're going to have to go beyond the sort of energy remit and kind of work with colleagues within our own organisations and within other public sectors. You know, going to our colleagues who do deal with, you know, from an economic standpoint, dealing with the SMEs and working with them, I think is going to be key to unlocking engagement with SMEs and putting it into their language so that they can understand the benefits of being involved with this.
Thank you. Kate?
Yeah, I mean, but it is challenging for us. Our colleagues in national procurement do a lot of work where they try to get SMEs involved in our frameworks and our procurement things, but I recognise it as a challenge. I think something that, and I don't know who would be the best place to do this, whether it's Scottish Enterprise or some other skills network or something, could perhaps offer some training to SMEs in how to search for tenders, how to respond to tenders, you know, things like Public Contracts Scotland that we have to put all of our tenders onto. Sometimes people are just not even aware of that platform or aren't registered on it, and maybe getting some awareness around that and some training about how they can respond to things. What we try and do, because I mentioned before, our estate is so vast and we have got everything from these, you know, huge hospitals down to the small community projects. If we are approached by an SME who have got a really good product or an idea, what we will try and do is say, well, maybe we'll look at one of our smaller sites, one of our more rural sites, to demo a project or do a pilot of a small project to give them that opportunity. And then once we can demonstrate that that's working, then we can maybe look at how we might roll that out nationally. But procurement is difficult in this area. It really is. So I think there needs to be some mechanism that SMEs are given more support in how they respond to those tenders.
That's a really good point, actually, Kate. I think picking up on that, signposting to particularly where there are frameworks, etc., signposting of how the SMEs can get in contact with the sort of the framework contractors, as it were, to benefit those sort of relationships and discussions. Because also typically tenders come out, there's not a lot of time to respond. So unless there's those pre-existing relationships, it's difficult for them to get engaged. So if they could have sort of a peer-to-peer beforehand, I think that would certainly facilitate more involvement.
Great, thank you. So I'll take one more sort of question to all of you, and then, as I say, there's some specific ones. There are a couple of questions that all I'm going to try and bundle together, which are really about whether the action we're taking now through these various programs and projects that currently exist is sufficient, I suppose, to get us to what we need to get to, and to Kate's slide with the very steep curve down to zero in 2045. To what extent are we doing enough, I suppose, and how far do existing frameworks and projects get us in terms of net zero buildings? And I'll maybe just start with Fiona on I suppose, with a bit more of a focus perhaps on public sector and domestic buildings, and then we'll go to Andrea.
Yeah, I think a lot of the work that we're doing now is going to get us a good way there, but I think probably a lot of public sector maybe feels this is we're awaiting the Scottish Government to bring in those carrots and those sticks particularly. We're all very tight for time, we're tight for budget, we need to prioritise these things, and we kind of need the government to tell us to prioritise these things. That's how it works. So from our point of view, we're doing as much as we can, and we are working hard, but we're looking to the Scottish Government to help push us further to make that a priority to our organisations, because everything's a priority, especially in these current times, and we need a steer on that, and we also need kind of funding and grants to keep up with that, to be the carrot to their stick as well.
Okay, Kate, is there anything more you can say about your steep curve graph? And
yeah, I mean, I think echoing a lot of what Fiona said around, yes, we need funding, yes, we need clarity on particularly some of the definitions that are used. We need some clarity coming from around offsetting strategies. We need clarity. We need more support, particularly around decarbonisation of heat. There's a huge amount of that. I'm reasonably positive that I think from an estate point of view, we will one way or another we'll get to a point, I think, certainly in the NHS in 25 years, that we will have effectively decarbonised our estate. I think we will, but that isn't going to get us right to zero without really now the whole shift in behaviour change. I used the phrase before, we've done sustainability by stealth, and that's, most public sector organisations will tell you that we do the big retrofits for energy centres, or we put in renewables, or we change all the lighting, whatever it is, and your average punter, in our case your average patient, average clinician, didn't know that we'd done that. To really get that transition now to net zero, we now have to get everybody thinking about what do they do in their day-to-day lives and their day-to-day jobs, and what changes can they make. So is it changes around how they travel? Is it changes around how they use energy? Changes around diets, around activities, around, all of that now requires a step up from individuals, from people in workplaces, from our leaders. All of that has to now happen, and I think that's so the stealth option is going to get us a big chunk of it. But to get that last bit, it is going to require the behaviour change piece, and that is really hard, particularly right now when there are other, priorities that a number of people have.
Thank you. Yeah, and particularly in the NHS. Andrew.
Yeah, it's definitely echo both what Fiona and Kate have said. I think one of the other things is these systems working together and having that sort of wider strategic thinking. I mean, the NDE framework is obviously sort of efficiency first, and it's driving down energy demand, but buildings are always going to have energy demand. One of the big challenges we've already talked about is low carbon heats, and particularly for the huge amount of our estate that is on sort of gas heating. Obviously there is the push for electrification, as we sort of know the grid is going to decarbonise, but I guess it's making sure that we have a bit of clarity or understanding what that impact is going to have, and where we should be prioritising now in the immediate and short term, and what the mid-term and long term looks like, so that we can, I guess, sort of try and make low regret options in terms of where the investment goes. I think importantly we should be doing something, and there's some really good things going on, and we should be following those, but there probably does need a bit more strategizing to bring them together. I think certainly things like LHEES are brilliant, and certainly if we can have like decentralized heat opportunities and things like the NDE framework or other initiatives drive the demand of the building down, so that it can increase the flexibility of those buildings to connect to things like district heat, so that the fabric first approach or the improved controls, etc., so that there's greater flexibility to flex to what the future of decarbonised gas is, decarbonised heat. Is it decarbonised gas or electricity? There are a few unknowns, I guess, is what I'm saying at the moment. These things will only go so far, but it's the step in the right direction, and it's just tying them all together. I think it's going to be important in the immediate term.
Thank you. Great. So we've got time for a few specific questions. I mean, obviously, for the panel as a whole, feel free to jump in on other people's questions, as it were, and I'll try to bring you in where I think it makes sense. There's a question here which is for Fiona, I think, on the work happening in Highland and the aiming for 2045. So the question is, from the package of works through HEEPS, ABS, EcoFlex and others listed on Fiona's slide, do the homes get to 2045 net zero standard, or what further retrofit would be required?
Yeah, some of the houses will see quite significant EPC improvements from it, but not all of them will get, I mean, they'll certainly not get to net zero. They won't all get to those 2045 standards. Currently, a lot of our funding schemes are very focused just on delivering measures rather than reaching targets for the domestic sector. So it will just be installing EWI, and that's kind of where the measure ends, for example. But now for the heat slabs, where we're able to offer the first-time central heating, we're trying to package that up as a whole house approach. So we've been specifically, for example, trying to target uninsulated cavity properties that are also eligible for the air source heat pump, so we can bring in that funding pot that E.ON had to deliver the cavity, and then at the same time install the first-time central heating. So it is something we're very aware of. Unfortunately, we just have to act within the funding mechanisms that we have and try and help as many people as we have. We have the additional barrier that cost of delivering these measures is quite high in Highlands, perhaps higher than in the Central Belt, just to get crews up here, to get materials up here, to get scaffolding up here. And that can kind of stop how far the funding can go. We could try and do a completely whole house approach, but unfortunately we'd be asking for large contributions from the homeowners. And considering a lot of these schemes are fuel poverty first, that's not something that we can ask or they can deliver on. So yes, short answer is we'd love to be able to get these houses up. We try where we can, but within the current funding, it isn't always possible.
Great. So I think this next one is probably both for Andrew and for Kate. It's about the NDE framework, but it's specifically about the NHS. So the NHS finance issue, I think you mentioned, Andrew, that was initially preventing use of the framework. Could you say a bit more about that and how it was resolved? What's been put in place to resolve that? So I'll come to Andrew and then Kate.
Yeah, sure. So I guess it's a bit of a work in progress. So the framework, when it was initially set up, that there is a couple of contractual forms. There's a design and build and a design, build, finance, maintain, sort of a longer term sort of concession period type contract. The latter was looking to facilitate private sector funding. With the ability for a contractor to come into an acute site or similar and be able to actually provide the funding for the measures and then actually provide a service and continuing to guarantee the savings over a 20 or 25 year period, dependent on the technologies. The challenge, one of the main principles was that is because the NHS doesn't have access to borrowing. Kate's much better placed than I to comment on that, but the access to finance is really challenging, obviously constrained capital budgets as well. So the ability to leverage the sort of private sector finance with effectively the utilities cost saving, paying back that finance over the period is a great opportunity, and we're seen as a really great opportunity to help invest into the NHS estate and backlog maintenance and all these things. Without getting into the detail, it was all about sort of Eurostat guidance and the off-balance sheet solution and where the risk sits in those types of contracts and where the EU saw it being appropriate and on or off balance sheet. And unfortunately, just the guidance for a number of years was a bit obscure and probably not positive. In the last 12 months, the guidance has become a lot I guess more positive, and Scottish Futures Trust and government and HFS have done some really good work with ONS and Treasury, etc., to explore getting these types of solutions back off balance sheet and the ability to leverage that private sector finance to really upscale, because otherwise there just isn't the capital in the estate. However many good projects Kate and her colleagues have got, there isn't just the funding for it at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, just to expand on that a little bit, bottom line is we can't borrow, end of story. So that precludes us from Salix. We can't use Salix finance. We can't use any kind of form of a loan. So if it looks or smells like a loan, we can't do it. And it doesn't matter if it's a government loan. It doesn't matter who's providing it. We cannot use it. It would also preclude us from if let's say an SME came to us and said, we've got this great product that's, say, going to save you energy over 4 years and you can pay us back in the form of savings. We can't do that. We just can't. It's a loan. We did, in the first iteration of the NDE, we thought we had a form of contract that was correct, and then it fell foul, as Andrew said, it fell foul of European rules. We do have a new form of contract which we think will be okay, but we haven't tested it at a project level yet. And I have a slight concern that even if we do test it and it does tick the boxes in terms of Eurostat and IFRS, that it may still not be attractive to funders, and we may end up, yes, it works, but we could be getting charged a massive cost premium. It's so much easier for us if we just get grant money, but that doesn't come very often, and quite often when it comes, and everybody in the public sector will know this, it usually comes in December with a rule that you've got to spend it by March. So we are desperately trying to find better ways of funding our projects that are not beholden to the end of the financial year, not racking up huge interest costs. But yeah, I mean, it is a challenge, but I think we're positive. We did manage to get a couple of energy performance contracts private sector funded before all the changes in legislation, and I do advocate it as a model. Those two projects are working extremely well. The energy savings and carbon savings have been absolutely phenomenal. So I would, yeah, as a model, I would definitely advocate it.
Great, thanks. Kate, there's another question specifically for you, I think, but again, others may want to come in and comment on it, which is about your new build commitment. Could you say a little bit more about what you think made it happen, other than your grit and resolve personally?
Yeah. I think it was partly the reason we got all of the commitments through was because we changed that language. So we were talking much more about health impacts, which is when I was doing my talk originally, and that gets our chief executive's attention. But specifically in the new builds, what we pointed out, and this is, you know, the same for every organisation, same for the rest of the public sector, a building that you build now is still going to be here in 2045. It's still going to be here in 60 years, 70, 80 years. Therefore, you have to get it right now, otherwise you're just locking in carbon, you're locking in the problem. So that was what we started to present to our leaders, of saying, look, if you get it right now, then you're kind of mitigating against that problem. The other thing we pointed out to them was that whilst things like LHEES and the Minister mentioned the new net zero public standard, public sector standard for new builds, whilst a lot of these things currently are they're voluntary, we may get to a position as we transition towards 2045 where some of this stuff becomes legislative. We may get to a position where fossil fuel boilers are completely banned. And what we were trying then to say to our estates guys was, you don't want to find yourself in a position in 10 years where you're having to rip out stuff and retrofit to meet now something that is much more legislative and mandated, because that will be more expensive. Do it now, and then you're kind of you're solving the problem before it happens, if so to speak. So we did some of that. In terms of how I think that the question went on around expectation of higher capital costs. Yes, but again, we've tried to say, but you're heading for a higher cost down the line if you don't do it now. Trying to change a lot of our business cases so that we're looking much more at life cycle costing, and that we're looking much more at the whole life of the building. But the last, I'll come back to emphasising the non-carbon benefits to getting a good, a net zero building. So emphasising the health benefits, the community benefits, the better internal environments, and again, so emphasising those over and above just the financial ones. But yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lie, it's not easy. We have developed it should be coming out next month, a new NHS Scotland Sustainable Construction Guide, and that's going to help our design teams. And again, that's looking at it quite holistically. It is looking at carbon and energy, but it is also looking at health and well-being and social space and green space and all of those kind of issues as well. So hopefully we'll have ways to help. But yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lie, it's not an easy one.
Fantastic. It's not an easy one, but it sounds like incredible. Yes, as I say, resolve and some really interesting lessons there about how these sorts of approaches might be applied more widely. We are very almost out of time. I just wanted to offer Andrew and Fiona any last word that they might want to pitch in on that question or anything else. Andrew?
Yeah, if I may, I think what Kate articulated was really obviously very good. I think that actually the public sector as well is doing a really good job of being exemplar and actually working really hard for this. And I appreciate it's challenging for the private sector when the commercial case isn't there as well. And I think it's just going to be one of these questions that was asked earlier, which was very good about sort of the knowledge sharing. But I think as the private sector maybe gets more incentivised, be that regulatory or what have you, hopefully we will see a bit more of a shift again on the improvement and meeting the targets. I think we do need that as well, and it can't be all leveraged on the public sector to take that burden. But they are doing some really good work already.
So I think we have 30 seconds to go. Fiona, do you want to have the final word?
Yeah, just to kind of quickly pick up on what Kate had been saying there, is that I think it's really important to look beyond our remit of just energy and see how energy connects into lots of other streams, whether that's health, whether it is just, carbon, what matters to people, and being able to connect it up and see how it matters to their everyday lives or their business. That's the key to pushing all this forward, is not just being so dogmatic about energy, but talking other people's languages, because it has to be a collaborative effort.
That's an excellent note to end on. Thank you so much to you all. It was a really broad waterfront of issues and some really inspiring projects that we've managed to cover in a small amount of time. So thank you all. Thank you to the audience for some excellent questions. Apologies that my light has gone up and down and now sitting in a cupboard. It's been a really great session. So thank you, and thank you to Judith and all the organisers for putting it on.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks.